Football Podcast. If you are joining us on YouTube this evening, good to see you again. We just finished up with Anthony Broom from the Wolverine about 10 minutes ago. If you're catching us in your podcast feed, we're going to drop this one on Thursday morning just to not barrage you on Wednesday. You have officially made it to the end of our fall preview series here. We are pleased to be joined this evening by Matt Flip from the Roar Lions Roar podcast to talk Penn State Nittany Lions. We are saving the best for last. Mr. Matt, thank you for taking some time for us late on this. It's still Tuesday, right?
It is, and I'm in Central Time too, so I got an hour on y'all. So it's pretty early in the evening for me. So you guys got late night Nittany Lions. I got a little bit better in me.
The perks of being not in the Eastern time zone. I miss those days. Yeah. So Clinton, I guess I'll ask you how you're doing, even though I know how you're doing because I just asked you this question an hour ago.
I'm doing really good, man. I'm excited for our first ever back-to-back. I've been looking forward to having this talk with Penn State. I'm excited for this team in 2024. I feel like I have a ton of expectations. I'm sure all the Nittany Lions fans and people who cover them have a ton of expectations. So I'm ready to hit the ground running and let's dive into this thing.
Yes, this is one I've been looking forward to for a while. We have some good quality Penn State fans who follow the show that I know who listen and who have chirped me before because I'm very hard on this team because, as I've said at one point, I understand now as a Notre Dame fan why everybody says, why don't you just win a game or shut up? Because, okay, I get it. But this is it's a season that feels kind of like a crap or get off the pot season for James Franklin. So I'm excited to kind of see how this plays out. If you are tuning in on YouTube, thank you for being with us once again on this evening. You can find us there at ITPCFB, the same place you can find us on Twitter and Instagram as well. Just give us a follow there. You can interact with the show. Clinton's tweeting stuff throughout the day when he should be treating patients and putting up polls and all that fun stuff. Or if you prefer to find us in your podcast feed, you can find us Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your shows. We are at Inside the Pylon there. Make sure you are following and or subscribing to the show, whatever the button is on your podcast platform, so you can get notified each time a new episode drops. We're going for this week. This is a little bit of a marathon, and I will certainly be paying for it by the end of the week. But starting with next week, we're going to get into our regular season recording schedule, and we'll talk about that a little bit on Thursday as we wrap up this week. Before we kind of dig into the meat and potatoes of tonight, Matt, just want to give you the floor for a second to introduce yourself and kind of talk about your background and your time covering Penn State here.
Yeah. Name's Matt. Been covering Penn State football since 2017, my first year on the beat. The year after they won the Big Ten title, where I watched JT Barrett go God mode against Penn State in the fourth quarter at Ohio State. Roar Lions Roar as a website shut down ahead of the 2022 season, and we shifted to podcast only. You can find us on Twitter over at RLR Blog, and then on YouTube at Roar Lions Roar. We're in your podcast platform of choice. We drop at least 2 episodes a week in the season. So we are ramping up right now with our weekly previews. And then once game week rolls around, we'll be in your feed twice a week. Grew up in Pennsylvania, grew up in a Penn State family. So I have seen pretty much it all over the last couple of years, except for what feels like the breakthrough that I'm sure we're going to touch on in today's episode. So excited to talk Penn State.
Yes, man. This is it hurts my soul because it's a team that I want to break through because I'm tired of the Ohio State dominance, and I know Clinton's not tired of it because he's one of them. But it feels like a team that has been consistent in the sense that you know that they're going to lose to Ohio State and or Michigan, usually both, but then beat the snot out of everyone else and finish at that 10-2 and going to a New Year's Six bowl game, which for the past, 5 years has not been so great because the conversation becomes, when are we ever going to get over the hump? But this year, that'd be great for Penn State because that would mean, we're a playoff team and maybe not hosting a first round game, but certainly playing another big game at the end of the season. So how I kind of want to start this conversation today, Matt, is surrounding the offense. And Andy Kotelnick was, for me, one of, I think the preeminent coordinator hires of the offseason who's going to shape how we talk about this 2024 season in December as we're approaching those first round playoff games. He's a guy who has up to this point in his career been attached at the hip to Lance Leipold, going, from the lower ranks of college up through, Buffalo and then Kansas. And it's a fun offense, man. Even, you talk about, we're not talking about a Kansas team that's been flush with elite talent, but boy, have they been fun to watch the last couple of years. And I'm excited to see what he could do with the tools that Penn State has, particularly at the quarterback and running back position. But the question does become, is this going to be an Andy Kotelnick offense, or is this going to be a 2023 Clemson 2.0 where Dabo Swinney brings in Garrett Riley to run the Dabo Swinney Clemson offense?
So I think it's going to be Andy Kotelnick's offense. The James Franklin offense, I still don't really know what it is after how many coordinators Penn State's been through. And it's crazy to say this is James Franklin's 11th season. The offenses have never really looked the same. 2014, 2015 with John Donovan was vastly different than what they had with Joe Moorhead in 16 and 17. Ricky Ronnie in 18 and 19, that felt more Moorhead-esque because Ronnie was Moorhead's QB coach. So I kind of get where that comes from. 2020, it was what it was. Like, they never practiced together. So was Kirk Sharaka's offense even really installed? Yurcich comes in. He gets 3 years, 2 years and 8 games, let's call it. And that offense felt different from anything we've seen before. So I don't really think Franklin meddles in the offense all that much, despite his background as, a play caller at Maryland all those years ago. So I do feel confident that a guy like Andy Kotelnick, who I think he was 24/7 Sports' offensive coordinator of the year last year, I can't imagine he would come to freezing cold State College if he wasn't going to get his chance to run the offense he wanted to run. So I feel really good that the Penn State offense is going to be very motion heavy, very run heavy, and really big into explosive plays. So pretty much the antithesis of what we saw last year with Mike Yurcich at the helm. So I'm excited for Andy Kotelnick to bring a set of fresh eyes and hopefully get the offense to just do what it does to the lower rung of the Big Ten, to at least come close to it with those upper teams in the conference.
Yeah, and Ryan could already mentioned it. I've kind of become a quiet little fan of Kansas over the past few years, especially when Jalen Daniels has been healthy. Man, they look explosive and they do so well. Now, I think Daniels is kind of a different style of quarterback than what we're going to see with Drew Allar.
Yep.
But just kind of how this offense is going to move with him fits us into question too. Drew Allar, great year last year. What did we have? 2 interceptions the whole entire season.
Yep.
Looked good most times. Watching the Michigan and the Ohio State game, especially that Ohio State defense, wasn't his best games of play.
No.
What can we expect for Drew Allar, who's now in year 3, but year 2 as a starter? And how much can we trust his wide receiver core to step up and help him in 2024?
So these are the big questions that I think every Penn State fan is dying to have answered. He had a 25-2 touchdown interception ratio. Like, the 25 touchdowns tied Taulia Tagovailoa for first in the Big Ten, and was like more than Sean Clifford had in any of his 15 seasons starting at Penn State. So right off the bat, like, that's a really great building block. But I think the 25-2 ratio doesn't really tell the full story, because they were terrified, or at least Allar was terrified, it seemed, to throw the ball deep. They were terrified to put the ball in harm's way. And that's great when you have the horses to pretty much stampede the Illinois, the Northwesterns of the world. But when it comes time against Ohio State or Michigan, and you're like, oh my God, their corners can cover our guys in the flat, it's a lot harder to get your offense to go where you need it to go. So I think that with Andy Kotelnick, I think the hope and the expectation is they're going to do a much better job scheming guys open for Allar to hit, and do a much better job getting the ball in the hands of their playmakers with a little bit of space around them already. Like, a big thing in the Yurcich offense was that anytime they would go hurry up, it would kind of kill momentum because they would do this check with me thing. So Allar would always look to the sideline and see if they had the read they wanted. It's kind of hard to play fast tempo when you're killing 5 seconds on a check every time. So I think the plan is to go a lot quicker, get the ball out in space to your playmakers, and I'm glad you brought up the wide receivers. Penn State's wide receiver core, it feels like it's been cursed for a while, but then you take a step back and, you're like, Jahan Dotson was just a first-round pick, a couple years ago. Parker Washington was just an all Big Ten selection 2 years ago. Like, last year, the room just really wasn't in a good spot. They've had a ton of turnover at the wide receiver coach over the, really since Josh Gaddis, who was a Broyles Award winner eventually as the Michigan offensive coordinator, since he left in like 2018. So it's been a revolving door since then. So they need guys now to finally step up and become playmakers out wide. And the big names are Trey Wallace, Harrison Wallace III, who was hurt for a lot of last year, was Allar's number one target in that West Virginia game where he looked unstoppable. Best game of the year was his first game, which is kind of rare. And then the other guy is Sean's little brother, Liam Clifford, who, despite the fact that he kind of looks like Danny Amendola, like, I think is a lot better of an athlete than Danny Amendola. Like, I think he's more quick than fast thing doesn't apply here. Like, Liam can move. Liam Clifford can scoot a little bit. So I'm excited to see what those two look like at the top of that depth chart.
Wait, did I miss one here? Did you forget Julian Fleming?
All right,
from the Ohio State University?
The Fleming thing is tough, and I'm glad you brought Fleming up. So in your fifth year, a guy who's had a lot of injuries, he's a big body guy. I don't think, and Clinton, you would know better than I, his forte in that Ohio State offense wasn't the big play guy. And that's what Penn State, I think, is going to be searching for in bunches. So, and I've said this a couple of times on the podcast that we have over the past couple of weeks. The best thing Julian Fleming can be for Penn State is be a guy who cut his teeth in the best receiver room in America and bring that energy to State College. Like, do what you did to compete with Jackson Smith and Jigba, Chris Olave, Marvin Harrison Jr., Garrett Wilson. Like, I can just keep going. If you're able to compete with those guys, your habits have to be really good. And if he can bring that to State College, I think a lot of those secondary pieces in that receiver room can take a step forward and be good complementary pieces. But I really don't think Fleming is going to be like a top 4 pass catcher on this team.
Yeah, I think the one thing you're going to get from Fleming outside of he works hard is he's going to pass block his ass off. I know he's a really good pass blocker with Ohio State, so he's not going to be afraid to hit guys across from him. Before we get into my favorite part of Penn State, and Ryan, you gotta let me have question 3 because I love these dudes. Offensive line,
man,
that's also gonna impact Allar this year. You just Olofashanu, however you say his last name, just left, got drafted.
Nobody knew. Nobody.
Penn State tends to have good offensive line play most years.
Yeah.
What are we going to have this year? Because if Allar's getting hit and getting pressured a lot, that's really going to impact their ability to, what did James Franklin get quoted as, chuck it deep or something like that. So that's going to impact that ability.
Yeah, I mean, you're losing Olu, you're losing Hunter Norzad, and you're losing Caden Wallace. So you're losing 3 guys on your offensive line to be drafted. It's like the first time in like 25 years Penn State had 3 offensive linemen taken in the same draft. With it, you have some talent, but not a lot of, proven commodities. At center, were you guys basketball fans? Do you remember Daryl Dawkins from the Sixers many, many moons ago? His son, Nick Dawkins, is now slated to be Penn State's starting center.
Oh, my God. I'm so old.
Big dude, athletic. The kid can hopefully play. It's his 5th year in the program. He's kind of been buried for a long time. And again, just on like a personal level, like anytime you see a guy stick it out for 5 years, you want it to work out. Like, you want the kid to have success. And then, at tackle, Drew Shelton, who came in and played as a true freshman when Olu got hurt back in 2022, had I think we can call it what it is, a pretty miserable Peach Bowl against Ole Miss. Turns out he needed shoulder surgery. So, it's hard to tell what was actually bad form and what was actually the guy's arm didn't move that well. So that's kind of a nerve-wracking thing. And then on the right side, you got 2 guys battling it out. Former 5-star Wisconsin transfer Nolan Rucci and 4-star redshirt freshman Anthony Donka. And that's a battle I think is going to last probably into like late September, if we're being honest, because both those guys, I think have a set floor, but now it's all about finding out what the ceiling is. So a lot of moving parts there. And anytime you lose, the number 11 pick in the draft, it's fair to expect to step back. But I think Phil Troutwine in that unit has the line at a certain floor, and it's just wildly different than when like Franklin first got here and it was converted defensive tackles starting at guard for a long time. So we're hoping to see where that unit can take the next step if they're able to at all.
And you bring up Olu, man. I'm a Bengals fan. I'm a diehard Bengals fan. And if you watch ball, Joe Burrow has had the shit beat out of him for many years now. And I would see mocks that had Olu fallen to 18. And I was just sitting here dreaming, man. I'm like, please, please, please. I'm very happy the Marius Mims they got from Georgia. But
Yeah.
I watched Olu a ton because I watch a lot of Big Ten football. I'm like, I want that guy protecting Joe Burrow's blind side. So I was a little disappointed and he didn't make it to 18 there.
Yeah, that's always tough when you see a guy that young too. Like Olu's only 21.
Mm-hmm.
He's a really, really young dude. So I think he's going to be a project for the Jets, but I think he'll turn a corner pretty quickly for them.
What isn't a project for the Jets? One of my best friends is a Jets fan, and every year I'm like, what can we expect here? And last year had all the hype, and then boom, 3 plays in, Aaron Rodgers torn Achilles on his next Hahuska trip or whatever he does. They were my favorite running back duo in the country until Quinshon Judkins came to Columbus and joined Travion Henderson.
Tough but fair.
Yes, but damn, I love Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton. I think those two sets there are my number 1 and number 2 running back duos in the entire country. I'll take that to the grave. I'll argue with anybody. They're the 2 best sets in the country. So last year, both players pretty well. Did pretty well in the offense, both run game, pass game. How do we see the workload being split with them in 2024 with now Andy Kotelnick coming in as well? How are we going to see that workload being split between them?
It's always been kind of an even split. I think, both these guys came in and played as a true freshman, and Singleton got a lot of the attention because he was the one who was able to break off a ton of big runs. But Katron Allen went to IMG Academy and was immediately a much more fluid pass catcher than Singleton ever was. Like, I hate to say it, IMG preps you better than Reading, Pennsylvania high schools do to catch the ball at the collegiate level. Like, it was clear Katron was much further along in that development. So Singleton got better this past year. Everything out of camp is that he's making strides again as a pass catcher. So I really do think it's going to be about as even as you can get it to be. Again, both these guys are true juniors. They're going to go to the NFL after this year. Like, unless you're Blake Corum and you're fine taking an NIL bag, any running back who stays 4 years in college with that kind of pedigree, you got to be insane. So I think their health is going to be paramount. I think, probably Singleton gets more of his touches carrying the football, and Allen maybe gets a little more as kind of, a guy you swing out in the pass game, even though Singleton is a little bit quicker. If you put Allen against a cornerback, you guys I'm sure have watched him. He's going to try to run the kid over. And that's a scary thought when you have like a 230-something pound running back sprinting at you. So I'm very curious to see how the run game evolves, because explosive plays were few and far between for the run game last year. I think Bo Pribula, the backup quarterback, had the longest run of the season, which is tough. That's a tough spot to be in. So I really am curious to see if it gets back to the, Singleton is the lightning and Allen is the thunder. I really do think that when they're both equal in terms of their carry load, it's really hard for a defense to game plan for those guys.
How do you kind of see them deploying these two guys? And I guess the impetus for this question is there going to be a situation where, or how often are we going to get a situation where it's not just one or the other on the field, but both, and not necessarily both just in the backfield, but, one guy in the backfield, one split out wide, one guy kind of utilizing motion, starting him out wide, pulling him into the backfield to try to get a defense a little bit off balance or questioning. Because I'm looking, I think a good comparison for this Penn State offense this year is just looking what Kansas did last year. And they had a fantastic running back in Devin Neal, who was, almost 100 yards a game on the ground, 6.3 yards per carry, but a guy who also caught 25 passes for 220 yards out of the backfield as well.
So I think one thing I really did, of the few things I really enjoyed about the later part of the Mike Yurcich years, was that split T that Penn State ran. I thought that was so fun, where they had both guys and usually a tight end line up straight up behind the quarterback. Once Clifford was out and Allar was a bigger guy, it added the QB sneak element of it too. But it was always fun to have, it could go to Allen on the left, it could go to Singleton on the right. That was really the primary concern when both those guys were on the field. Under Yurcich, they didn't really have a ton of both of them being on the field at the same time. When he got fired, it happened a lot more often in the later half of the stretch. But I do think we're going to see a good chunk of Singleton and Allen lining up in the same backfield. You probably split one of them out wide. Probably bubble screens. A good chunk of that is going to be get your athletes in space. A ton of RPO for all of Allar's flaws. The dude ran for 200 yards last year. Like, he's no statue in the pocket. He's a better runner than I think he gets credit for. So I do think that, especially by nature of the receiver room having as many questions marks as it does, it makes sense. Pull that third receiver off. Let's add the second running back, and let's see if we can create some confusion. So I think we're going to see a good chunk of that.
Well, right, and that's my exact thought here too. And if I'm thinking it as someone who doesn't closely follow Penn State, you got to think they're thinking it too. Is you hear enough about, hey, maybe there are some guys we're excited about in the receiver room, but if we're concerned about their ability to get open and be available playmakers for our quarterback, why don't we get our two best skill guys on the field and really try to start confusing some defenses here? And we'll get to the schedule here in a minute. I don't want to kind of jump to that. But aside from kind of a shotgun start, you have a little bit of a good runway here with, two MAC teams in the non-conference and then a soft landing in the Big Ten to try to work some things out here on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, it's pretty fortunate. Penn State has this weird thing where they keep starting the season with a Power 5 opponent. 2020 Indiana, 2021 at Wisconsin, 2022 at Purdue, 23 West Virginia, 24 at West Virginia. Like, it's been a hell of a run here, and I don't know why they did it to themselves, which is always kind of fascinating. I think everyone prefers that easy on ramp, but overall, I think that's about as perfect of a start as you can have. Like, if you can get through West Virginia, especially now in the 12-team playoff, I think that kind of puts Penn State in a driver's seat for one of those big spots. Like, Ohio State is the juggernaut it's going to be. You kind of afford yourself a loss to one of Wisconsin or USC on the road, if that were to pop up. I think they can hold their own in those games, but, get through West Virginia, handle your business, and then really figure out who you are when you're hosting, I think it's Bowling Green, Kent State. I think you got a bye week in there in week 3. So you have enough time to figure out what your offensive identity is under Andy Kotelnick. Again, my only concern is that you're going to a hornet's nest for a noon kick in Morgantown with a West Virginia team that I think has a pretty good quarterback in Garrett Green. And I think has a pretty good coach who's really coached and saved his job last year in Neil Brown. So you get through that, though, and I think you got a shot to build your roster and build your team to where you need it to be to make a good run down the stretch in the Big Ten.
Yeah, that game last year was fun to watch, and it was really interesting because I don't think any of us knew how good West Virginia was going to be last year, and you're sitting there watching it, and Penn State struggling with them. You're like, man, is Penn State cooked this year? And it turns out West Virginia was a 9-win team, and they were both pretty good teams last year.
Could have won 10. They lost the 10th one on a Hail Mary to Houston.
Yeah. Oh, my God, that Houston game.
Penn State fans were like, oh, playoffs are over. Straight the schedule just went down with that one. And I'm like, everyone's so naive. It's so early to say that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Moving on to the defensive side of the ball here with question 4. There was a lot going out on the defensive side. First, from defensive coordinator Manny Diaz getting another shot being a head coach in the ACC with Duke, but also a couple explosive athletes on that defensive end position, notably Chop Robinson, but still have some dogs coming back tonight. Dennis Sutton and Abdul Carter being first and foremost on that unit. Who are some additional names to watch just in that front 7, and what can we kind of expect from a Tom Allen-led defense here?
Yeah, first thing on the Manny point, I cannot believe he came to State College all those years ago. For a dude who the furthest north he ever coached was Middle Tennessee State, watch him come to Happy Valley. That was listen, good for him. I'm glad he's back somewhere warm. So, the front 7's a bit different for Penn State this year because Tom Allen is going to run a 4-2-5. That's kind of what he's always run. With moving Abdul Carter from linebacker to defensive end, you're kind of giving up some depth in that linebacker room. And listen, Abdul was first team All Big Ten last year as a linebacker. He's pretty mid in coverage. Like, I'm really glad they're just going to make him say, hey, just go rush the passer. Do what you do best. And kind of the surprise for Penn State this past offseason is that they got 2 sixth-year players at defensive tackle to come back. So they have like grown men at defensive tackle surrounding these 2 explosive athletes. With the big one being Devon J. Thomas, formerly Devon Elise. He changed his name this past offseason. And then junior Zane Durant, who is an undersized guy, but a really explosive athlete and really came on strong down the stretch last year. And then if you're going to know one name in that front 7 who aren't, Abdul Carter and deny Dennis Sutton. It's Tony Rojas, the linebacker out of Fairfax, Virginia. Played last year as a true freshman, was the Virginia Offensive State Player of the Year as a running back. So the kid moves. Like, the kid can scoot. He moves really well for a linebacker. And, the Franklin had his post-practice media availability tonight. And, it seems like he's always bringing up Tony Rojas as a guy who is going to be a playmaker for that team. So I think Tony Rojas is a guy that not a lot of people know just yet. But that's going to be a name that I think Big Ten fans quickly figure out is a guy they need to be watching on Saturdays.
What just generally, we're talking about, a Penn State defense that was exceptional last year. And
best of my lifetime, and it's not close.
And you get to whenever you lose the defensive coordinator and you're maybe shifting scheme a little bit, that there's some things that can kind of get lost in translation just because that's what happens when you go from one scheme or, one voice to another. But we're talking about a guy in Tom Allen for, regardless of how it worked out for him at Indiana, he's a fantastic defensive mind. What would you just say are reasonable expectations for this unit in 2024?
I think everyone expects a step back. Like, again, that Penn State defense last year was the best of my lifetime. Like, I've never seen a Penn State defense play that impressively, like dominant from start to finish, except for the time Michigan ran 30 straight plays against them. And outside of that, like the Ohio State game, they did a really good job containing Kyle McCord. They, outside of Marvin Harrison Jr. kind of cooking Kalen King towards the end there, they did a really good job keeping that offense in check. And that's hard to do in Columbus. So, hat off to Manny. I think for Tom Allen, a lot of it is going to be maybe sacrificing some turnovers, which, was a staple of the Manny Diaz defense, and more so focusing on not allowing as many big plays. Not that Manny allowed a ton, but when you play that, style of see ball, get ball, you're going to get burned every once in a while. So I think it's going to be a top 10 unit in the country again. Will it be top 5? I would bet against it, just simply because I think law of averages has to step in at some point. But again, the secondary is losing a lot, but you have KJ Winston back, who people think is going to be the first defensive back out of Penn State drafted in the first round, which feels crazy that it's been all this time and there's never been a defensive back out of Penn State to go in the first round. And a lot of people are really high on KJ Winston to be that guy. But again, you're replacing, your 3 starting corners. You're losing a starter with an asterisk in Keaton Ellis at safety. But Tom Allen has the pieces he needs there to have another really good defense.
I was going to say, that was my point. I was going to pop in. How have we not mentioned Winston? And just in general, we talked about this, I think it was Ryan Herrings, I believe, my Ryan here, about the safeties and the DBs, just the DBs in general in the Big Ten this year. But Caleb Downs, you got Waller for Wisconsin. I'm blanking on the guy from Iowa. Rod Moore when he's healthy for Michigan. Winston for Penn State. And then you got the corners, Burke and Johnson. The defensive back play in the Big Ten this year is elite. And I was telling Ryan before, I don't think we're going to have to wait until the 20s to see the first cornerback taken in the 2025 NFL draft when we come this way.
No, I doubt it. It's also funny because the Big Ten quarterback grouping, I think, is not ideal this year. So I think there might be some good stat lines popping up for some of those secondary players. So I'm curious to see who leads that interception race.
Oh, well, Jesus, that was I think a lot of the national discourse as we kind of got towards the end of last year gearing up for Ohio State, Michigan was, are these defenses actually as good as we think they are, or are offenses in the Big Ten just awful? And as it turns out with Michigan, yes, they were as good as we thought they were when they completely eviscerated both Alabama and Washington in the playoff. But yeah, man, there's still a lot of question marks at quarterback in the Big Ten this year, and maybe even this year more so than last year, given that, Oregon's got a guy in Dylan Gabriel that people are already penciling in as a Heisman favorite, but who's struggled to stay healthy. And, Will Howard's a guy who certainly has some upside, but hasn't necessarily shown at Kansas State in his career. And Michigan, yeah. And then, Michigan doesn't have a starting quarterback yet. And, Indiana's going to the MAC, and a bunch of other teams are bringing in transfers. There's just a lot of question marks on offense in this conference this year.
Which is great if you're Iowa, I will say.
Hell yes, that is absolutely correct. Is Cade McNamara one of the 5 best quarterbacks in the Big Ten? Stay tuned for my TED Talk. We're going to go actually a third hour on this evening, and I'm just going to talk about Cade McNamara. I'm kidding. Listen.
You're going to be flying solo on that one.
I'm already incoherently rambling, so it wouldn't be any different. I want to kind of get, at least as we kind of wrap up the football portion of this discussion, going into question 5 here. I am curious what you kind of think are expectations for this team this season, because kind of looking at the schedule in general, I mean, you don't have both Ohio State and Michigan on it. You don't have those two boogeymen staring at you. You get out of that Big Ten East, and I'm sure that, you ask anyone in that program, they're never going to sit there and tell you, oh, yeah, well, they have our number. We're worried about playing them or anything like that. But to at least be out from under the specter of having to beat one or both of those teams just to make the flipping Big Ten title game has to be somewhat of a relief. You only get one of them this year. You could lose to Ohio State and you could still rematch them or play someone else in the Big Ten title game. And from a conference draw standpoint, I mean, we already touched on the opener against West Virginia. I think we're going to learn a lot about this team in week 1. I mean, a road trip to USC is going to be potentially difficult, but again, we're talking about a USC team that has a not exactly proven defense, if we're going to be kind about it, and they just lost their quarterback as good as Miller Moss looked in the bowl game. So you don't know what you're going to get from them. You don't know what you're going to get from Wisconsin in year 2 of the Luke Fickell era. Washington's completely remade, and then the rest of this schedule in the Big Ten is just it's not great, to be completely blunt about it. It's a very doable schedule for Penn State this year.
Yeah. So the term I've used to describe Penn State and it caused a lot of rifts just even in our podcast, is that I call Penn State a window program. And kind of what that means is Franklin has there's this, I think, this false narrative that Franklin's a much better recruiter than he is game day coach. I don't think that's true. Like, you look at the recruiting rankings, the guy's never signed a top 5 class. He's signed twice as many classes ranked outside the top 20 than he has in the top 10. But he routinely has his teams, in that, let's call it 8 to 14 range. That to me sounds like a better game day coach than recruiter, just based on, numbers. So I always thought that with Penn State recruiting the way it was and with what the rest of the Big Ten looked like, it was fair to expect them to have a ceiling higher than 10 wins about 2 times a decade. I thought last year could be that kind of year. With what the roster brought back, Chop Robinson, Adisa Isaac, Olu, Singleton, Allen, you got the 5-star quarterback now. I thought that was going to be the year. And frankly, they choked it by being inept on offense in their 2 biggest games of the year. I think this year, 11-1 feels like an area that is very attainable. But with that being said, they've gone 2 years now without dropping a dumb game. And that's really hard to do 3 years in a row. The dumb ones pop up all over college football year after year. So I'm not saying USC or Wisconsin is a quote unquote dumb one, but I could easily see Penn State losing on the road to what a lot of us perceive as a less talented team. I don't think that's unrealistic to expect. So I'm kind of planting my flag at 10-2. And I'm with you. I think it's playoff or bust. I think that if you're going to have this kind of talent on your roster with the 12-team playoff, you got to do it. I'm not asking to do it, 4 times every 5 years. Give it to me 3 out of every 5 years. Give it to me 2 every 5 years. I'm fine with that. This one has to be one of the years you get it done, and you get in that 12-team playoff. I think the roster's too talented not to.
I was gonna say, have you ever listened to the Solid Verbal before, Matt?
Yeah, actually, Ty went to my high school.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Well, Ty has a saying he's been going through in the Big Ten previews. Anytime Penn State comes on, he plays that little "I'm feeling 22" for Taylor Swift, except he changes the lyrics to "I'm feeling 10-2." And he said that is the mantra for Penn State football is you're safe to bet they're going to go 10-2, but can they finally get over the hump? And I just thought that's been a fun little witty piece there that he's had going through these Big Ten previews.
It's tough because even when you get that, before the Connor Stalions thing, Penn State beat Michigan 3 out of 4 years. They had their number for a little bit there. And it was always tough because that second loss was like Michigan State. It was like Minnesota. So again, I have those scars from being all right, great. You cleared one of the 2 big hurdles. and then, oh my God, you fell in the mud. So
Yeah.
I'm kind of always on the lookout for that's going to come up. And the fact that it hasn't happened the last 2 years makes me a little bit nervous that they're a little bit due for that.
And that was an interesting point you brought up on Franklin, and maybe I just don't follow the recruiting rankings closely because it seems like just the national discourse around him, and I don't know if toxic is the correct word about it. Maybe toxic is the correct word about it, but it seems like you get some of these discussions where it almost feels like you listen to national people talk about him, and it almost feels like, are we still giving him credit for what he did at Vanderbilt a decade ago? But when you kind of outline the recruiting rankings like that feels very late stage Brian Kelly at Notre Dame to me, where it's like there's this guy who just is signing fine classes. Like, we're consistently sitting in the 12 to 18 range. And it's like, well, that's good enough to beat all the dog ass ACC teams on your schedule. But then you go up against, a Trevor Lawrence led Clemson team in the Cotton Bowl, and your Thorpe finalist cornerback gets hurt in the second quarter. And all of a sudden they drop 3 bombs over Dante Vaughn because he doesn't know what the fuck he's doing out there.
It sounds like it's from experience.
Listen, I have a lot of trauma as well. It's good to get that out. But no, I just I don't think I ever conceptualized Penn State's recruiting ranking in that way. So, you know what? If I learned anything this evening, I think I've been a little too hard on James Franklin.
And listen, but Franklin, it's a big boy job. Franklin makes a lot of money. He doesn't need me to come on podcasts and say well, actually, he's doing very good.
Oh, sure.
With this much talent on the roster, and I get Ohio State's always going to be more talented, but when you're the guy who won 9 games at Maryland, your whole thing is kind of you figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
So to not be able to figure it out and have the longest losing streak to Ohio State in program history, it's kind of maddening. I feel like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, but, it's hard to contextualize really how well has James Franklin really done, because his recruiting rankings seem to say he's coaching better than he's recruiting.
No, I've lived that conversation for pretty much every year since 2015. It's, well, yeah, they're not recruiting, they're shopping down a different aisle, or whatever his quote was. But, he's still such a great game day coach because of how they're outperforming these recruiting rankings. But at the same time, if he was such a great game day coach, when they have these blips where they, happen to strike on a generational quarterback, a 5-star quarterback, or you get that 5-star skill guy out wide, you would think that if they're such a good game day coach, why aren't they able to scheme up a game plan that's going to beat one of these top 4 teams in the country?
Right. Exactly. That's kind of where I think everyone is for James Franklin. Again, I do think people are a little bit too hard on him, and I think that they were told he was a recruiter 10 years ago, but I don't know. I think I'd be curious how the discourse evolves if he were to take the Florida job, if that were to come open in the future.
Mm-hmm. And it also just feels like it's one of those things too that after a decade, it's like, well, we were promised this and we haven't gotten it yet, so we haven't gotten it, and I would like to move on. And we didn't talk about it with Michigan, but there's been a couple of times this week where we talked about the mystery box, and it seems like the sports fans' favorite thing is the unknown, right? Whether it's the next head coach who you don't know, or the mysterious high 4-star prospect who hasn't. The backup quarterback, yes. The conversation around Drew Allar his freshman year is, well, why don't we just put him out there and see what happens this year? Because we've seen Sean Clifford, and it's, he's fine, but Drew Allar's a 5-star. He could potentially be better. You never think about the downside of that move. It's always, well, we don't know what it is, and we're comparing it to what we've seen, and it just has to be better than that. And very rarely it is. Very rarely it is.
The problem with Penn State is I think everyone kind of knows who the next head coach is after Franklin. If Franklin were to leave, it's Matt Rule. He grew up in State College. He went to Penn State. The AD at Penn State was the one guy who hired him at Temple all those years ago. So I think it's hard. If Rule has a good year at Nebraska, there's going to be a old money portion of the Penn State fan base that's going to be insufferable to go get Matt.
Ryan, I want to flip this on you since it's our last one. You get to ask my bonus question, and I'm going to ask your normal final question to Matt tonight.
Beautiful.
Matt, Vegas has, I'm looking at it right now, Penn State sitting at the over-under of 9.5. We've all three talked about we expect Penn State to do well this year. But what has to go right for Penn State in 2024 to get over that 9.5?
Drew Allar has to not get happy feet when there's pressure in his face. No, I mean, candidly, Allar has to be better. His receivers have to be better as well. The offense has to find a gear, even if they find the gear they had, like back in 2019 when they had KJ Hamler and they had that big threat, and Jahan Dotson was part of that team as well. Go back to that. If they can have that kind of performance, I think that's going to lead to success. And then defensively, just don't bottom out. Be a top 10 unit, and that'll get you pretty far against this schedule, I think.
Certainly.
That makes sense to me. So our last question is a non-football related question because why not? It sounds like fun. We've been asking everyone this. Everyone loves pizza. Clinton used to phrase this question as we're both pizza guys. And I told him we got about halfway through it. I'm like, Clinton, everyone's a pizza guy. Even people who are lactose intolerant like pizza. But we've been asking everyone their favorite local pizza places. And I know you're not in the State College now, but from your time being around campus, what would you say is the best pizza honor around the State College campus?
All right, I'm going to cheat because there's a place called Fascia Luna that had a second location called Luna 2. And Luna 2 was more or less closer to the exit of the press box of Beaver Stadium. So if you timed it right, after Franklin post-game press conferences, you could pretty much dip out pretty quickly and make it to Luna 2 before a lot of the crowds got out because everybody went to the actual Fascia Luna. Luna 2 has since closed, which is devastating. But Fascia Luna in State College, I think, is the best pizza as far as Central Pennsylvania pizza goes. I think that takes the cake.
Awesome.
Clinton's putting it on the list. Where our long-term goal is to make it to every Big Ten stadium. We're probably only going to get one a year, so it's going to take us 5 decades to finish this adventure here.
Have you even? Who knows what the conference will look like by then? How many have y'all done so far, or is this a new excursion?
So we just started this podcast in April, so we'll have our first one this fall. We're going to Purdue, Oregon, so we're going to West Lafayette.
Nice.
Yeah, we're going to catch Oregon the week after they play Ohio State. It's going to be a night game,
Friday night game. Weird things happen in West Lafayette on a Friday night.
That sounds like the seventh circle of hell, making you fly from Eugene, Oregon to West Lafayette after you played Ohio State to go to what's it called? Is it Bryce Eccles? Is that Purdue? Oh man.
Oh God, this is gonna bug me. I've played at Purdue a million times. Yes, bingo. The big drum. That's all I remember. No, so this will be our first podcast trip. I've been to the Horseshoe once. I've been to Michigan Stadium twice. Bowling Green played here when I was an undergrad, so we went to that game. This would have been 2010. Just because I'm never going to go to Michigan Stadium again. And I think Denard Robinson had 150 rushing yards about 7 minutes into the game and then rolled his ankle. And they're like, okay, you're done. We're not going to risk you playing this poo-poo team. God, I don't even remember the final score from that. Bowling Green was in it for a minute. I think their starting quarterback that day was Aaron Pankratz or something like that. And then they got absolutely
deep hole.
Yes, we're getting a deep cut here. Aaron, if you happen to listen to this podcast, shout out, brother, man. I've never met you, and I don't even know if you were playing quarterback for this game. I'm going to have to go look at the box score now after just to confirm or deny this. But I went to that because I'm this will be a once-in-a-lifetime experience. And then I moved to Ann Arbor, and we went to the Illinois game. This would have been 22 when they almost lost, when Corum got hurt.
Mm-hmm. The kicker shanked a field goal towards the end of it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yes, but we left at halftime because it was 10 degrees outside, and I layered up, except I wore regular socks, and by the time halftime came around, I could not feel my feet. And I looked at my girlfriend and I said, we have to leave or you will be carrying me back to the car because I can't feel my toes.
Oh, that's brutal.
So I've hit 2 in the Big Ten. Clint, are you just at the Horseshoe or have you hit anything else?
I've had Ohio State numerous times and I've been to Indiana twice.
There we go.
And then I've been to the Big Ten Championship 4 times, I think, 3 or 4 times.
Nice. So, I got to go.
I'm looking to expand.
For the final time before they tore that down. Yeah, I don't think there were toilets. I'm still not convinced. All I saw were porta johns. I'm pretty sure.
Well,
It was crazy.
at the new stadium, all you got to do is go take a pee right into the lake because you're
true.
right next to it. You're like 20 feet from it, so you don't even have to worry about using a porta john this time.
I don't know, man. With that level of wind, the splashback potential is going to be probably about 98%. So you got to be careful with that.
So I'm going to try to sneak over to a game at that temporary stadium just to see what it's like because the wind.
That's so cool. That's so cool. That's a legitimate once in a lifetime experience there.
Mm-hmm. You're not kidding.
Well, before we let you get out of here for this evening, Matt, just let our listeners know where they can find you and what you guys are working on here over the next couple weeks, heading up to this banger of a season opener for the Lions.
Yeah, you can hear the pod. Again, it's Roar Lions Roar, a Penn State podcast. We're out there on Twitter over at RLR Blog. The podcast you can find on your podcast platform of choice. We're on YouTube. We're dropping the offensive preview. We recorded it maybe like 2 hours ago. So we have our big offensive preview dropping today, or I guess yesterday, if this is coming out on Thursday. It's coming out August 14th. If this is dropping the 15th. So that should be out in your podcast feed right now. If you want to, read my tweets about the Chicago Bears, who are America's only morally good NFL team, you can find me on Twitter over at MattFlip42. And yeah, we'll be, like I said, we'll be in your feeds on the Penn State front at least twice a week throughout the season, sometimes sprinkling in a little bit more. We have a lot of fun.
Shit, then. So between the three of us, have we logged like 7 hours of combined podcast time this evening?
It's been a big one.
Absolutely.
Good for us. Good for us. Well, we did it, y'all. We have officially ended the fall previews here at Inside the Pylon. Thank you, everyone who has joined us on this adventure. We were talking about it a little bit off air before this one today. This was kind of a shot in the dark thing that we were putting together, and at the end of May, we didn't think it would be really anything. Thought we'd get a couple people if we were lucky, and we ended up getting someone from all 19 Big Ten Midwest teams. So we're really appreciative of everyone who took some time to impart knowledge on us on the show, and in turn impart knowledge on you guys for listening. We'll be back with you guys on. We're shooting Thursday night. I am all ass backwards on where we are in relation to this week. My chronology is all messed up. So if you were listening, you will be listening to this in your podcast feed on Thursday, the 15th. We are going live again on YouTube on the 15th, Thursday night, talking college football fantasy. We got a couple guests lined up for that. Clinton and I are both jacked for this show. We've been playing college fantasy the last couple of years. Clinton's salty because he has still not beaten me in this league. I am the 2-time defending champion.
Oh, whatever. Get out of here.
It's become so clockwork for me. I keep forgetting that I win. So that's where we are at with this.
Oh my gosh.
So we're excited to bring that to you guys on Thursday. Thanks everyone for joining us this evening. Everyone have a great night.